What's cooler than being cool? Join us on Cool, 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 the podcast that explores intersections of inspiring technology, fascinating people, and captivating stories. Get ready to embrace your inner cool kid as we go behind the scenes with today's innovators and storytellers. I'm your host, Cameron Kitt. I'm a filmmaker and founder of Yo-Yo's, a documentary storytelling company. And today we have the privilege of chatting with Andrea Learned, the phenomenal climate champion, advisor, and host of the award-winning Living Change podcast. Very high quality podcast that you got to check it out. So when I think of you, Andrea, I think of you as this like Power Ranger who's changing the world through your like life and your actions. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, that's a great introduction. I appreciate it. Yeah, it comes from the heart. It comes from, as we'll talk about, it comes from the joy. I don't know. I have this energy. I'm like an energy bunny, Power Ranger, energy bunny.
Yeah, like the vegan bike riding Power Ranger, whatever color that would be. I don't know.
What color would that be? I think
don't know.
my favorite color is orange. You can't really tell, but this top I'm wearing is kind of a bright orange. And someone once told me that orange is the color of change. Right. So I keep changing and growing and asking for change and whatever. So maybe my Power Ranger is orange.
Oh, well, this will be great because I have a question about that. So this is called Cool, 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 right? Cool people, cool tech, cool stories. You're one of the coolest people I've met. But growing up, where did you feel like you were a cool kid?
No, I felt like I kept trying to find kind of the crowd that would fit for me. So I was an athlete, right? I also was kind of a creative kid. I was I was smart. I was all these things, and none of them really served me. And so and in fact, it kind of compelled me. I ended up going away to high school for a couple years because I was a little bored. And that is not to say that it was too easy for me. It was just that I needed more stimulation in all these ranges. So I think what's compelling me even in my career now is just that I'm like, I haven't quite found the tribe. And I think getting into podcasting and sort of more creative worlds and events is really helping. But I never felt like the cool kid. I was wanting to hang out with the cool kids. And I never found that right fit group.
But it's so interesting because like what you're doing, I wonder if there's an element of that of like searching. So you talk about how like you wear the color of change. You're this agent of change where most people are really resistant. Like our evolutionary like instincts are to avoid change, right? If we can help it, even though that's just not how life works. Where do you think this like change agent lifestyle started off for you? Like where did that come from?
Let me see. I feel like it was really early on, and that, like I said, going away to school was really random and unexpected in my world. And so once I did that, I was exposed to people I'm from a small Midwestern town. It was an East Coast boarding school. I was exposed to people from all over, more creative. And I just was like, oh, and I think that really broadened my horizons, but I kind of didn't know how to tap into it or what I was going to do with it, but I always wanted to be around it. And so from then on, I just sort of, I might have seemed like I was kind of laying low and doing things the way I should do them, but I kept watching and kind of veering in directions that I thought would speed my way to finding my people.
Yeah. So that was the moment, right? You went from a Midwest town to this East Coast school where you were exposed to a lot of different things, and that kind of lit your fire a little bit. And so you're a published author. You have a lot of experience marketing and speaking to women. Can I just ask, what was it that made you transition from that work and that world into climate influence, what you're doing now?
Well, the funny thing is that I feel like I got into that world and it was great and kind of served me. But in my head, I was never thinking, oh, I really want to help figure out how to sell more stuff to women. So it was kind of by default. It's a marketing. I co-authored a book called Don't Think Pink about marketing to women. And it was pretty successful for a business book, from an unknown author, et cetera, et cetera. But what really intrigued me was the psychology of the decision making and how to kind of tap into that, right? To get, and it was this whole thing, not surprisingly, you don't just appeal to women by throwing pink on something and then selling it, which we continue to see today, right? But it was kind of like, no, you appeal to the sports fan in a woman, and and then she happens to be a woman and whatever. So the book is, of course, much better than that, but I was really interested in the decision making and the process. And that really led me to going, wait a second, I'm much more interested in sustainability, and kind of not helping people think a little bit more about consuming. And then, frankly, it very quickly went from, do I really want to think about how people consume at all, or do I want to use what I know to help people lead better? So my energy raised, and I got much more interested in what I was doing when I started to write and think and talk about leadership from a green, kind of leading in a more sustainable way. And then that segued into getting into climate action spaces.
I'm going to ask more about that in a minute because, like, I think it's really helpful to have the specifics. I think sometimes our brain thinks, oh, climate, broad, move away, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
need something specific. And when I heard you say, well, I'm vegan and I ride my bike everywhere, like that is the specificity my brain needed to hear to be like, okay, those are the two like lifestyle choices that are really out there that make it really easy for people to attach to say, oh, like, okay, I can do that. So I can also be open about that. And my question is about actually when you mentioned the word energy, you and I have talked a lot about mindfulness and kind of like going internal and reading a lot of books about mindset. Like for me, when I started this business, I had a very similar feeling to you, where I just kept getting these like kind of waves from the universe of like yes, yes, yes. Has that happened? Did that happen to you when you first started doing sustainability work?
Yes, yes, yes. It definitely did, but I have to say I was still on this path once I got into the word climate, right? Which I wound my way to. I didn't get into climate until 2015. I was involved with a sustainable business coalition at COP21 around the Paris COP. And once I kind of the sustainability thing and the understanding of communication strategy and kind of leadership platform building from that perspective got into climate, I was like, oh, it was just. And the other thing is, my biking started because I'm really practical and I'm really impatient. I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time, and I had a friend who I knew through work, and he got down to the same part of town, and he's like, why are you taking the bus? He's like, get a bike. And I was like, what? I hadn't ridden a bike since I was whatever, a teenager. And it changed my life. Had nothing to do with climate. Nothing. But then when I started into this climate thing, I got really into focused on cities for climate. And I was like, oh my gosh, bikes. So it's almost backwards, right? I realized that these behavior changes, these things that really appealed to me, oh, it is all connected to climate. And then once I realized that, my world just exploded.
I mean, and the biking is something that you can do that actually gives you positive feedback, right? Recycling doesn't really give me dopamine, and like I love eating all the various forms of tofu, so that kind of does, but like riding a bike around the city does it's like a positive reinforcement the more you do it. And I'm seeing a lot of waves of this changing in, city planners, and you've interviewed a lot of multiple people on your podcast about this, about like the importance of bikes and how we're going to change how we live in cities. That's really what I'm interested in. It's like solar punk is like, how are we reimagining the future? Whenever I'm riding my bike on the street, I just get so freaked out by the cars. I'm like, they're so big, they're so scary, right? Like it totally changes your perspective. When you're in your car, you feel like you're a butterfly. You're like, I couldn't hurt anyone. Like I'm fine. But you're driving like a 2,000 pound metal like monster. So it is really interesting how like that's a very specific thing that can change. I guess just speak on that a little.
Yeah, well, I mean, to your point, because we talked offline or yesterday about your use of city bikes, what I've found is that anybody who sees me in my neighborhood is like, oh, oh, oh. And like a couple years later, they come to me and they go, so, oh, I just got an e bike. And then I go, okay, the first thing you need to know is do not ride on the roads that any bike map tells you to ride on. So there
Hmm.
are all these secrets about how to do this. You have to gain confidence. But people are always like, oh, I could never ride a bike. I could never ride a bike. And I was like, listen, I didn't realize it either. Once I did, you inch forward and you inch forward. Uh, Everyone I've talked to with on the podcast, whatever, it came down to really being frustrated with the commute and cars, then understanding that it was really fun to ride your bike on a weekend around your neighborhood. Then you start taking your kid to school. Then you start, the shorter trips. And so the emphasis, and I've understood this, I'm not a bike advocacy person deep in that world, but from the
Yeah.
bike advocates I know, it's about there's so much joy and health to be had from converting your car trips to local bike trips.
Hmm.
And then what happens, to your point, is you attach to this behavior that didn't have anything necessarily to do with climate. And then you realize, oh, this is so cool because I'm not, buying gas if you've got a gas car, or, sort of not needing to, use gas to get around. The dot connecting is amazing. And then what I have found, even in the people that I've kind of converted to e-bikes over the last like 5 years, they quickly become the ones that are enthusing, and their neighbors then all buy it. So it actually really works like that. And I think one of the reasons the work that I do can be so powerful is because I discovered it as a fluke riding a bike. Then I got into e-bikes, I don't know, 2018. And I was like, oh my gosh. And the way that I enthuse and the way that I live influences other people to do it. And
Yeah.
so that begins my kind of curiosity about climate influence, what I call climate influence. It's
Yeah.
powerful. These little things that you do that you kind of take for granted. And then we can talk about it a little bit more later. But this whole thing of being whole food, plant-based, right?
Yep.
Vegan is
Yep.
but we all know that there's a political thing if you say the word vegan. And so
Right.
sometimes
Plant-based
I
is
don't,
stronger. I gotta get used to saying it. I know.
yep.
I'm
So,
used to vegan. It's an older identity
well,
relationship term, right? Where you're
yes,
just like,
yes,
oh,
yes. But the thing is that I was talking to these two like 74-year-old guys that ride their bikes up and down the street in my neighborhood every early morning. And they were like, I don't know, they were sort of teasing me or something. And they were just like, well, how old are you? And I was just like, I told them how old I was. And they're like, mouths dropped. And I said, I'm vegan and I ride a bike. I said, that's the answer. They
that's
just
it.
couldn't believe it. And so I don't run around saying, this is the thing, you're going to look 10 years younger or whatever, but people never, ever believe how old I am. I have
Yeah.
joy from biking, and I'm
Yeah.
healthy as I've ever been because
Yeah.
I went vegan in 2017. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I can't help you if you think that's political or whatever. The truth is you have more health and more joy. Oh, by the way, both those things are massive climate action.
Mm-hmm. Without being pushy, it's like something we've really been talking about is just the importance of representation. Like you talking about riding your bike, the representation of the joy does have this ripple effect. It is interesting to just see how many more e-bikes have been added to every city bike dock and how ubiquitous it is becoming, because in New York there are so many situations where it is actually the fastest way to get where you need, and it's actually the funnest way to get where you need. So it's really easy to say yes. And so I'm seeing this huge wave of like finance bros getting on the bikes with their full suits on and like in a huge mass, and they're having a good time. Like, and so it's like exactly what you said. It doesn't have to be my first thought is this is for the earth. Most of the
Not at
time, the
all.
first thought is I have to get there in 15 minutes, and
I
I don't want to bike uphill. I'm going to get on the e-bike, and it's going to kind of take me up there, and it'll be great.
But
So
so this is the thing, this is the part of my work is like, I want to hear the stories of those finance bros, right? Because
hmm
they may be like making money off of fossil fuels or whatever, right? It doesn't even, but like, what was the moment where they're like, oh my gosh, why am I driving? Or why am
hmm
I taking an Uber? This is amazing. What was that conversion moment? That tends to be a big part of like what I'm talking about in my podcast, what I'm
Yep.
talking about in terms of climate influence storytelling. When you start to hear more people that are surprising validators or unusual suspects go, yeah, I am a person who lives in the middle of the country and I've driven a F-150 for 8,000 years and da da da. And then I had a moment and I realized that I could do all my trips in my neighborhood by e-bike and it has flippin' changed my life. That's the story. That's the one I'm
Yeah.
looking for. That's the one that has massive climate influence, yet we do not have to wrap it in climate. It's the joy, it's the life conversion, it's the health, it's the, oh my gosh, I had no idea, which in a way goes back to our kind of mindfulness and spiritual awakening discussion. It's like the moment that awakens you to a new level of joy or whatever, then you just backtrack and go, oh, I can change my food. I can change this is the whole chain of events that I think we have not tapped in climate.
Yeah, and that very specific goal is what's going to bring it to you. So, anyone listening to this podcast, if you know of a surprising validator story, what comes to mind for me is my 64-year-old dad, who's like now a huge yoga champion, who started doing it only because it's not climate based, but like it's just interesting, surprising twist, right? Of now he's doing it because of the benefits for him. And like, if you know somebody who's driven an F-150 their whole life and now rides an e-bike, find Andrea Learned on LinkedIn and message her at
Please, please.
LEARNED.
Yes. Yes. Well, and yes, thank you for that plug. I am out there looking for people who suddenly just, realize e-bike was amazing and are a totally like unusual suspect for doing that. I'm looking for the same in moving to a plant-based diet, which a lot of times comes from maybe a pre-diabetes diagnosis or something, but
Mm-hmm.
it's this person that you would never suspect. Maybe they come from like a beef eating ranch family, that
Mm-hmm.
they had this moment. What was that moment? I want to talk with them about it. And then we can go from there, because people who are maybe at a point where they're considering or kind of opening up a little bit to riding a bike or going plant-based or changing their behavior in any way, they're looking, is there anybody that I respect or aspire to be like in my network who's done this already? The
Mm-hmm.
minute there's one person who's done it, they're much more open to be able to do it. I want to tell stories where it's like, oh my gosh, the mayor of the city rides their bike. What am I doing? That's the kind of influence that we're not really leveraging yet, I think.
Well, the word influencer gets really watered down. I think it for me what you're talking about is sort of that Malcolm Gladwell maven concept of like the original meaning of influencer, of like people in a position of power, fame, authority, like in the public eye, having that kind of influence by representation, sort of like what we're talking about. Um, that leads me to my next question. So, the word climate influencer, can you just elaborate on what that means to you, especially today in this economy, this socially complex environment? Like, what does that really mean for you?
Well, it is somebody who steps up to the fact that, one, they've got any sort of platform. So in my podcast, I interview a DJ who of course he's got global online followers, but he realized that he could use that. I spoke with mayors who have stakeholders in their cities, right? People realize that not only is the stuff that's best for them in their profession, they want to change transportation infrastructure or whatever, but by being loud and by being seen doing it. So I would say that these people do not call themselves climate influencer, right? Climate influence is the term. I have to just start calling myself a climate influencer. It was hard enough for me. So I'm actually calling myself a climate influence scout. I find it, I name it, but the people who have it don't think about it. They're not aiming to be on stage at a climate week or a COP. They're living their life and they're expressing sort of changes and what they found in behavior change. And that has massive climate influence, because if we can influence X number of people to start eating a little bit more plant-based, that is major climate influence. So the influence is something that we name later, that we go back and look at, right? That we can kind of compile, but it's just a person awakening to something that's like really motivating and compelling to them, changing their behavior a little bit, and then going, oh, if I occasionally get a picture taken in front of a plant-based juice bar and say I had a great smoothie or whatever, that's going to help. I mean, seriously, if I pull up to a meeting, I talked with Mark Gamba, who's a former mayor of Milwaukee, Oregon, and now is the Oregon State House representative. And he talked about, as mayor, being very visible, riding up to meetings, having his bike helmet on, kind of maybe being soaking wet because it was Portland or whatever, as a demonstration of it can be done. And this is how you trust my policy decisions or what I'm really forwarding. And I think that's me being vegan and riding my bike everywhere. You cannot deny it. I pull up everywhere, right? It just is what it is. And so people can trust what I have to say about it. So I think it's influence that exists. And to your point, I don't think it's the typical influencers. What I see in kind of communication strategy or typical maybe consumer facing campaigns is, if we just get X and Y celebrity who has a bazillion followers on Instagram to post, let's go vegan or whatever, right? I liked this plant-based burrito. It'll make a massive difference. No, it won't. That's not surprising. And everybody already knows that they're being paid a lot of money to do that. So it's the storytelling of the person that had no gain, is not being paid to post about anything. That's just like, oh, geez, I just love riding this e-bike. That's it, right? That is the story. So these are people that aren't considered influencers by anybody else. But if you really look at it, they have a platform. They've got a little niche network of people that are really watching what they're doing.
I was just thinking, like, okay, who would what your point about like celebrities aren't surprising is interesting, because I always think if you're a celebrity, you have a platform, you absolutely have to use it for good. And I judge celebrities who don't. I'm like, I'm so surprised. Anyway, but what if,
No, I'll
like, I was just
clarify.
thinking,
I'll
like,
clarify. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
So I'm also part of like a Slack channel of sports and sustainability people in the industry and kind of journalists and whatever. And the athletes who are using their platform to talk about the fact that they're plant-based or whatever, I'm all for that. When it's obvious X and Y brand paid me to say, go
Hmm.
eat this plant-based whatever, and you only ever see them doing that once a quarter or whatever, it's clear that it's a schedule. But if there are athletes or anybody who's just like, man, I love this riding an e-bike, it's incredible. They don't talk about the brand, they don't whatever, they're living their life. That's an authentic representation. So that sort of celebrity influencer.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, okay, the one celebrity that would probably fit that, there's more than this, but like, what if Clint Eastwood was like, yes, I'm plant based, like that would be surprising. Or like Kamala Harris or Elon Musk, like that'd be crazy, right? That if, like, they would be surprising choices, maybe. Or someone who's like political figure or a major CEO, you're saying someone who has a different kind of influence than celebrities. Yeah.
I'm saying a lot that a lot of what I'm looking for are major CEOs, because that crosses like all sort of, if there's a partisan thing or if there's like, that crosses all these things. People aspire to be really wealthy and sort of appear to be a leader, right? In our society, a lot of times it's a man, right? In our
Hmm.
society, a lot of times it's a white man.
Hmm.
When a white man, male CEO leader of, say, a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 company is visible, and that's something I say a lot in my work, be seen. If they're visible, requesting a plant-based meal, or it's visible or known that they ride a bike whenever, the few times they're actually home and they take their kids to school on the cargo bike or something, that makes a huge difference. Doesn't need a neon sign. And people who aspire to one day be a very wealthy CEO of a Fortune 500 company are going to go, huh, they will open up to the idea much more.
Yeah. So, it's been what, 5 years that you've been on this journey, maybe longer, 6 years that you've really like leaned into the climate influencer angle. What's been
The
one of the,
cli-
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the climate influence, leaning into that. Yeah, I would say it's been about 5 years. Before that, I don't know that I had a keyword or whatever, right? Like I wasn't using a complete, but it's been kind of using leadership as a platform to forward more sustainable and climate focused thinking, which is just a mouthful. When I came up with this climate influence term, it really helps umbrella everything for me.
Hmm.
And then I can kind of apply it to a lot of things.
So what's been one of the biggest plot twists that have happened in that, since that, I love Climate Influence Scout, but like, what's been one of the biggest plot twists you've had to face, and how did you overcome it since you started that journey?
Well, this is interesting, as I think it happens to a lot of people in business. And that is, I have been previously uh, working in a way where I am an advisor or I have clients, right? This is like I'm out there trying to drum up business from organizations or corporations that really see the need for this leadership platform thing. The biggest pivot has been they 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 want to forward the brand. They want the leadership to be very specific and dialed into that and structured. No one really got what I was going to say, or wanted to do it as big and to be seen kind of as a leadership in a sector or an industry on this front. Like it wasn't enough of a sell. They weren't going to do it. They didn't have the budget. It wasn't in there. And so I felt a lot like I've been kind of up against a brick wall trying to find clients to work with. And any client I've worked with has been like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Right. But it's just been really, so once I was just like, wait a second, I'm the person, right? I've got this climate influence. People do listen to me. The podcast was extremely well received. Uh, Even the thing that I enjoy most, which you must enjoy both from doing this and your documentary work, is that the people that I've highlighted or featured have been like, I had no idea anyone would be interested in this part of me. I had no idea that whatever. And then a lot of the people I've interviewed have said, I mean, I've almost been like, should I start a cohort of all the people that have been interviewed by me, because they are energized by going, oh, right, I should be louder about riding a bike. I should be more visible about being plant-based. So the pivot back to your question was, again, I was trying to do things the way that it appeared that I should do them. I'm an advisor, I'm a strategist, I'm a whatever. When I finally realized, no, I'm a climate influencer and I inspire people. Really, what I'm supposed to be doing is doing these bigger, creative, collaborative projects, like getting involved in podcasts, like moderating or interviewing people on stage. So owning that it's my enthusiasm and my voice, and right, it really is my joy. I've told people that this joy is a thing that bubbles up out of me and always had since I was a kid. And there's a band called Idols that I've discovered through KEXP, which is a radio station I mention all the time in my work because it's changed my life with joy. This band Idols out of Bristol, UK, has an album called Joy as an Act of Resistance. And when I heard that album, I was just like, that is it. That is who I've been my whole life. And in a way, you're looking at climate right now and you're just thinking, we are doomed. Like, this is horrible. I have a form of resistance, which is if one or two white CEOs of Fortune 500 companies steps up and does a pivot or is a surprising validator for this, we could flipping change the world. Because I would wrap stories around them, that leadership, I would amplify it. I know how to create that into the new leadership social norm. And no organization or campaign or whatever has tapped that. Like, hold these people accountable as human beings. They aren't just Joe Blow, the CEO of whatever. What does Joe Blow think about climate? How has the climate affected his personal behavior in his life? Not down to like, does he recycle, but like, did he have a moment where he was like, geez, Louise, I should be riding my bike, 2 miles to the grocery store. I want to know about that moment because I want to share that moment. If that CEO then goes to their garage and sees their Tesla and sees their whatever, and usually goes, I think I'm going to ride my e-bike. That's the guy whose story I want to tell, because if I find 3 of those people, that becomes the social norm. The new CEO of today in the United States is the one who's acting on climate in his work, and you can see it, and you've built trust in that because you've been watching him or her in person change their life. That's what I'm about, and that's what I'm convinced of.
It's a great time for us to take a little break. Um, this podcast is brought to you by Yo-Yos, which stands for You Own Your Own Stories, a documentary storytelling company that demystifies cutting-edge technology with emotional human stories. If you got a cool story to share, we can help you get it out there. Ah, okay, Andrea, I just really love what you said. The way the plot twist was that you're finding it hard to find people to be brave and go out there and do what your like mission in life is to do, is to kind of be this pusher, this change agent. And then you realized, oh, it's me. I have to be the one who's doing it. And then people start to follow. Is so beautiful. I just love that you're sharing that. I think that's like very inspirational, something to hear. I mean, especially I'm in this like women in business group, and they were talking, a lot of them are consultants and advisors, talking about like, how do I feel comfortable like taking ownership or like authority or feeling good about projects that I consult on, where it's like not me doing it, and like getting comfortable with being a consultant in the shadows. So it's like sometimes you have to do the opposite and say like, oh no, I'm doing it, So I love that.
Yeah,
What would you, oh,
it,
go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
sorry, it's just been huge, and I think that it's really blossomed, or I've gotten more comfortable with it, like literally in the last year. And I would advise anybody who's got that kind of niggling in the background to pay attention to it, because once you kind of get over that fear of stepping out a little bit more, I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
literally asking CEOs, right? I'm asking people to be a little bit more public about their personal life. And I had to step out and be like, I'm the brand, right? I'm this person who's
Mm-hmm.
nudging this. I'm okay
Mm-hmm.
being out there in the universe with this. I'm asking them to do the same. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone needs to see somebody in front of them who's a teeny bit, yeah, braver. I don't know, bolder. Like if anybody in front of you takes a bigger step, watch them and take a cue, I would say.
Yeah. So who are, speaking of this, so who are some people that are role models to you in the climate space, and like what have you learned from them? Learned.
Learned, my great last name. Um, Role models. Let's see. It's so funny. um, Gosh, I don't know why I'm struggling a little bit with that
She's such
question.
a trailblazer that she doesn't have any, like, yeah, I mean, that's really, isn't that interesting? That, I mean, I'm just going to say that shows the paucity of like role models out here in the space, right? There's only a
Well,
few people I can think of who like are making it their brand. So,
yeah, and the thing that's interesting is I'm always thinking, I've never had a corporate job. I have nothing that it's like this person used to be the blah blah at X brand. This I've got none of that. And so I feel like that made the whole process or the journey for me harder, but I also can be bolder in stepping out. And so I know people that have been in corporate jobs that I know behind the scenes have way more that they could be giving, but they're held in by what, because it's a public company, they can't do this or that, right? Or legal will say you can't use your Twitter feed or whatever to talk about that, or you can't use Instagram. So they're hemmed in all of these ways. And so I want to acknowledge that as I'm out here looking for people willing to be public, be more visible, rather. I feel freed by the fact that I have not had those ties. And so when I look at people, I see a lot of people with potential who have not broken out yet. And that's what's really frustrating for me. I will say one person that I worked with in the last year is a woman named Catherine Atkin, who was one of the original policy architects for SB 253, which is now the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, something like that, lots of C's, in California that Governor Newsom did sign. She really impressed me. And it's interesting because it's a similar story, which is she had been working on this. She'd been behind the scenes doing stuff like this in climate policy for years, stayed under the radar. And then when SB 253 was really getting heated and it was being voted on and whatever in California, there was a realization, right? Whoa, it'd be really good if people knew a little bit about how this person has kind of been directing this from the get go. And so it was wonderful to meet her and to help her get a little bit more visibility on that front. And that's what, if I do get clients in the future. So of course I'm doing all these creative collaborations and things, but those are the kinds of people I want to work with as clients in the future. They've hit the point where they're ready to be known. So I will say that it's not that fun to meet someone who you hope would be ready, but they're not yet. Because I can't help them. They have to get ready on their own. Once they're ready, I basically shoot them out of a cannon with leadership visibility, And so I will say Catherine Atkin uh, is incredible, and she was a real amazing person to work with. So she's inspired me tremendously. And yeah, I know of a lot of people who are about ready to go who haven't yet, and I'm waiting for them to be ready. Let's put it that way.
I mean, yeah, it's like the thing about growth is it is painful, right? Like when you push a new shoot out from, if you're a plant and you push a new shoot, it has to like go out through the plant, and it does hurt a little bit, right? So it's like you want to just push people like just do it, just do it, just do it, right? But we like to stay in our chrysalis. You said two things. You talked about legal, and I don't know if we talked about stockholders or expectations. Just speak a little bit about the challenges that leaders face when trying to be more visible about climate actions.
Well, it's interesting because everything, I mean, I was talking with you the other day about I believe there are CEOs that are out there in the world that people know of and are very familiar faces who might be plant-based, but they're not going to be public about it because what if the product that they're making is a really sort of center of the country white bread kind of, product? They're not going to come out about that. And what if their whole world is huge gigantic trucks? They're going to try and be really private about the fact that they have so much love for their e-bike and mainly just ride their bike around their hometown. So the politics of that are there. And then also because so much is like, and I don't know what this is legally or whatever, but if you're a public company, a publicly traded company, you are always having to think about, your shareholders and what the CEO does and is seen doing is a legal thing. And so the legal team will say to the PR team, do not let that person loose on a podcast, right? Or whatever. And so I'll see people wanting to be on my podcast and they've really structured how they want to be on it, right? And why this person should be on it. And I'm just like, no, if this person can't talk about how they've changed their personal life and how that's impacted their decisions or how they think about policies in their profession, I'm not interested. I don't care if they're the king of the world and they've, made this much money for the company and whatever. So and I feel like we need more podcasters and more kind of people that will hold them to that and say, listen, we're not going to bite on your PR pitch. Like, we need to see that you're actually doing this. So it may be that there are a lot of people who are just really hamstrung by legal and PR saying that you can't come out about your individual kind of what your values are because it will impact all the people who don't think climate change is real, who might be shareholders.
And it's just, again, a lot of fear. But what it sounds like is it's not just the CEOs and business leaders that need to be educated, pushed. It's also the company structures, the board of directors, the PR team, the legal team, that need to be educated about the money that they're missing out on by not driving forward in this, right? Like there's a huge opportunity cost of not doing it and being a late adopter. But it feels like the larger the company, the more conservative they get, right? The more fearful they are about decisions. As someone who makes films, I've definitely been on the receiving end of companies cutting the more interesting, edgy, scary parts, right? Because they don't want to be sued, they don't want to be painted a bad light. And I do actually understand that. I empathize with the people on the legal team. They're like the bad guys for the whole company because they have to go around telling everyone what they can't do. I think that that's the use case that's missing, right? Is if you're worried about losing money, let's talk about all the money you're going to make by
Well,
coming out and saying this.
yes. Well, and it's like we are at the exact line of, with the fossil fuel stuff, right? It's like, how much longer are those fossil fuel, CEOs going to hold on with their last breath? Meanwhile, the world is falling apart around us. We read that in the news every single day. And who's afraid to be seen leading us to the thing that's obviously and inevitably right there tomorrow? So they are, and this is interesting because they're enduring all sorts of name and shame, media coverage, et cetera, et cetera. And yet they resist. They're like Teflon. It's like they're not paying attention. And this is part of my argument for my work. If there's one of those guys who has a moment, right, who decides, you know what, flip it, we're not going to do fossil fuels anymore, we're going fully into green, blah, 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 that person is somebody that I want to talk to and elevate their story. What was the personal conviction that made them go, you know what, this is ridiculous, this is inevitable, green is better for my kids, for my grandkids, like those stories. There's actually one kind of old, kind of established story related to this, and that is Ray Anderson of Floor, I believe. And that was the company was always named that. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's a textile brand out of Georgia. And he was early to the game of going, and he literally wrote books. He has since passed away, but he's literally wrote books saying he had a spirit of the heart, right? A conviction of like, what are we doing to the earth with all these textiles? And he changed the whole model of the business. It's like the most sustainable flooring textile. And his whole point of being, and the reason that he wrote books is to say, we're all going up a mountain. We're leading right now. We want you to follow us. Mm-hmm. So I will remember this. He was aging and sort of failing, but still kind of around, and I had a request in to interview him, and I was sort of working on it, and he passed away within like a couple months of that, and I was just like, no, because I wanted to interview him, and that would have been sort of a capstone, because he was an early one of these people that I'm now looking for now.
Can you say his name again?
His name is Ray Anderson.
And what was the company he ran?
Well, it's Floor now, FLOR.
FLOR, yeah.
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 And they're
Yeah.
really
Wow.
known for corporate sustainability and all that, but it
Wow.
really was, and they, right, it still is that. But the thing is they needed him, like his voice and his personality and him being the founder of the company and all that. That's the story that pushes that forward. You know, Floor can talk about sustainability as much as they want to, but without the leader being seen leading, and really you can see the conviction when they're up on stage talking about it, it's not the same. And I'm looking for a couple more Ray Andersons, and I'm going to
Yeah.
leverage the heck out of them, even to the point of like helping them write a book or something. Like these people we need more Ray Andersons. And that's really
Yes.
what my whole thing is about.
I love this so much. Like I'm on the Ray Anderson Foundation website right now, and it's like 1994, the Epiphany, and this is exactly what you're talking about. This like uh, he looks like a CEO, white guy, suit, tie, and it's 1994, and he's talking about this massive awakening that he had. Yeah. Well, let's get you more Ray Andersons.
Yeah, let's get more Ray Andersons. And I will say, kind of related to something that we've been alluding to, he, I believe, was Christian, right? So he had a stewardship of the land kind of thing. And so to anybody who has whether it's formal religion or whatever, if you've got some sort of religious or spiritual belief or sort of awakening, that connection to the land and what we're doing to the creator's world, at some point that's going to hit you. And if you're vaguely aware of it now, act on it, because this is it, you know?
Yeah, climate, what do we say? Eco anxiety is so widespread and so terrifying that it often will paralyze us into not doing anything. And what I'm hearing from you, and what is such a relief, is it's just these like very specific, actionable things. Ride your bike, eat plant based. Those are the two things that we can do right now. And then we're going to convince massive CEOs of large companies to come out and say they do the same thing. It's achievable. It's like if we talk about shutting down the whole fossil fuel industry, which is everyone's dream, that's like how many steps, right? I mean, I don't know how many steps it's going to take. Lots of things are happening inevitably, weirdly, because of the market. But I think what I really appreciate about you, Andrea, is the specificity of this mission. And I think that's what's going to help it get achieved and help bring all the right people into your world, you know? Um,
Thank you.
so can
And the
I go
point
ahead?
is, we only need a couple, right?
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you know that there's an investor in your world or a philanthropist in your world or a CEO in your world who is the right person, who could be more visible, could be seen leading in this way by by driving less, like riding a bike, maybe even taking transit, right? Or has gone plant-based, I need two or three, and the storytelling and the amplification and the way that, I will push them into writing great books or whatever, that can change the world. And here's the thing, it will change the world much faster than we've been hoping and praying, that all these great consumer facing campaigns, there's not enough influence there to do it. We get onesie twosie. If we get people that a lot of people look up to who said they've made a change, that's the lever. That's the thing. And so we just need a couple. So yes, I'm so happy to have talked about this with you here. And I'm looking for a couple of you. Give me a
Mm-hmm.
call.
Mm-hmm. Be brave. Um, what's something I didn't ask, but I should have asked you?
Gosh, that's we had a nice conversation. What I feel like one of the things that's interesting that we could talk about real quickly is the power of podcasting and documentary filmmaking. I think I'm coming into it, from outside, right? And I've been looking as a communication strategist, looking for the right vehicle, whatever. Then I get into podcasting and I go, okay, there's this whole other level of storytelling, whether it's narrative or kind of interview. There are bunches of stories that aren't being told well. There's a huge opportunity for it. You and I know a lot of people that are doing it. I was sort of clueless or not as dialed into the power of it. And everyone says new media, right? Social media, blah, blah, blah. But if there's a substantive piece, like a short documentary or a podcast series or whatever, I think that there's massive power in it. And I think that companies, organizations, nonprofits, foundations that are looking to have some sort of impact in climate and social impact are really missing the boat if they're not dialing in and looking at podcasting and documentary filmmaking,
Yeah.
because
Storytelling.
it's storytelling. And I think, to your point, storytelling, there's a whole thing about describing to people about storytelling, how important it is. You think about reading a story to your kids or whatever, but really now it's like the ultimate thing that we need more than ever is me telling stories about those CEOs that we're going to find one day soon,
Yeah. Well,
or it's,
mhm.
and so the storytelling, the power of storytelling, and why, if you're going to look at stuff that you should be funding,
Yeah.
that's it, right? I
Yeah.
would say even more than research, because clearly a lot of people don't give a rip about research,
No.
right? We could have all the facts in the world. It's the storytelling of the incredible research and stuff that already exists, or the incredible people that already exist, and we're brave enough to make some shifts. That's the stuff that's going to move it now. And that's the stuff that's going to move it fast enough, because we literally, right, according to the IPCC, according to these climate reports, we don't have really very many years at all of like thinking that we could have any impact. So no, do not funnel money into research that may come out 5 years from now and whatever. Funnel it into the storytelling around the people and the research and kind of what's existing now that can
Yeah,
really
who's
move the
doing what,
needle.
right? I mean, oh, Andrea, like, I'm so glad you brought this up because it kind of brings everything together. I mean, you talked about being interested in psychology and coming from from that perspective, right? The psychology of how humans work. The reason why these podcasts and honestly YouTube as a form of mass media education work is because of the specificity and the access. Like, at the end of the day, you telling me about Roy Anderson and what he specifically did and what his life was like is what I will remember, right? Stories are remembered 22 times longer in the brain than you telling me any fact about the environment. I cannot for the life of me retain any facts about the environment. I try, but they evaporate. But what I can remember is him. That's how my brain works. So when we tell those specific stories, like when I listen to these interviews on your podcast and I hear specific stories about people's background, what they're doing, it becomes understandable to my mind. The other thing is podcasts and YouTube are things that individuals access on a constant basis without a lot of intermediary action from other companies, right? Yes, it might be Apple or Spotify, but you're going straight to the audience, and there is a huge audience of people who listen to podcasts every day and watch YouTube every day, and so you can go direct to people with these stories without having to go all the way through like massive media conglomerates. It's a totally new world, right? So like you instantly had access to this community and now you've started to build it. You didn't have to wait to go pitch a TV network or pitch a radio show or whatever to get on that channel. So I think that's one of the more powerful parts is like you can start going directly to the people with your stories. Um, and I'm really proud of what you're doing. I can't wait for season 2
Oh, thank
of
you.
Living Change.
We're
My
out.
last
We're developing it and looking for aligned partners, and it's really exciting. Yeah, I can't wait for season 2 either. I'm hoping, season 2 there might be something about season 2 that I can talk about at Climate Week
Mhm.
but yes, thank you. It's incredible to talk with you about this. The energies there, you and I have both met incredible kind of collaborative, like the community is out there of people that are ready to just really blow this out of the water. And the time is now. And so it was wonderful to like get this kind of conversation and to talk about all these things with you.
Well, speaking of collaborators, this is cool, 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 right? So I'm looking for the cool people doing cool things. What's one person that you think would just be a phenomenal guest to have on the show?
Hands down, Janelle Kelman.
Okay.
She's running for Lieutenant Governor of California in 2026. She's become a friend. She's a rock star, and she would be somebody that I ultimately would want to interview myself. But if you can get her on Cool, 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 I think it would be amazing.
Well, joy is an act of resistance. That's the takeaway. Andrea Learned, where can we find more about you? Where can people follow you?
I made it easy. I recently changed my website to AndreaLearned.com. And so
Awesome.
if you go to Yeah, AndreaLearned.com. And then I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. I think if you put Andrea Learned and I don't immediately come up, throw climate in there and I'll come up. With Living Change, it can be because the title doesn't have my name in it. Look up Living Change Climate, and that should bring it to the top of whatever platform you're on.
Or Living Change
And I do have a
podcast.
Substack.
Yeah.
I do have a Substack, and you can find that link from my website.
Andrea, thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure.
Yay! Well, thanks for tuning in to Cool, Cool, Cool. It's been another episode. Huge thanks to Andrea Learned for joining us and sharing her incredible story. Be sure to check out the show notes where you can see links to Learned On, her website, the podcast that we just talked about, Living Change. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode, so join the conversation on social media with the hashtag Cool, Cool, Cool podcast. And until next time, stay cool.